Welcome to Rhythm Rose Cafe. This is the place where you come to interact with people that can actually talk about current events without getting crazy with each other. We're trying to imitate the roles that people used to have back in the 60s, where you'd go to an old-time coffee house and you'd have a disagreement, but it would be friendly, and you would have some kind of conclusion, or not conclusion, but an end to the story at the end. So we hope you enjoy, and we also hope that you comment and give us questions. This is interactive, folks. We want to know what you think. And tonight's host is Will.
Yeah, hey guys, hanging out here today with Danny and Nick, and I figured we could talk about, war. Seems to be popping up everywhere. We've had Ukraine and Israel going on for a while. Apparently Pakistan and India are going to be going at it, which is a little different. First time both sides have nuclear weapons in these recent conflicts. So, yeah, I've just been watching all this go on, and I've been kind of thinking that, when I was growing up, it was always, the Republicans were the warmongers. We love the war machine. Dick Cheney ran Halliburton. So, it's all about feeding the beast. And, the liberals, the Democrats, very anti-war, Vietnam protests we learned about, Kent State massacre. And I don't know, today it just seems like there's still a predominant faction in the Republican Party that, likes war, supports war. Some of them are in this administration. But overall, I feel like Trump is anti-war. Vance is, more of an isolationist, pro-America. I don't know if Vance cares so much about war itself happening, but he just doesn't want America involved. And, Democrats just seem to be supporting all of it, whether it's just straight opposition or what.
Well, I think the new administration's position is more like, what's in it for us? Why would we get into this? I don't think, this present administration, if somebody were to mess with us, if somebody were to do something to us, that they would have any problems, unleashing hell, as they like to say. But I think they're much more conscious of, why are we spending this money, and what does it benefit us? Unless you're really attacking us or attacking something that has a vital interest to us, we're not going to get involved. And I don't have a problem with that. A lot of Republicans just like the fact that they want to be the tough guys on the street. Everybody came to the America. We're we were the world's policemen at one point. And now
Trump won. He had John Bolton going in there. If you want to talk pro-war, I think when we first invaded Afghanistan, John Bolton was saying by this time next year we'll be celebrating in Tehran, the capital of Iran. It's like, dude, totally different country. Like, what are you planning to do?
Well, I'll tell you. Some of the stuff I agree with you with, but the Democrats actually had an increase in the draft during the Vietnam War. Nixon decreased, and then Nixon pulled a Biden at the end. Okay, he got the hell out of Dodge and didn't care how he did it, and didn't care who he left behind. And there were people that were trying to reach onto the runs of the helicopters, the last helicopters that left the roofs of those buildings. I'll never forget that. Yeah. It was just as bad, if not worse, than Afghanistan. It was a rerun, Afghanistan.
I've seen the
of-
side by sides.
Yeah, it was a rerun of the whole thing. However, LBJ did not do anybody any favors when it comes to war. Okay, he felt that if you poured a lot of gasoline on it, put a lot of people in there, spend a lot of money on it, we had to win because we're America, right? He was never out there.
I agree. I think that maybe the difference we're looking at is you're looking more at elected politicians, big D Democrats, and I'm looking more at popular sentiment. And I feel like, the
Liberal
political
element. The liberal was the popular, because LBJ was hardly a liberal. Okay,
Right.
He was center right sometimes and
Okay.
center left maybe.
Well, I mean, he put it on steroids, but Kennedy also was sending troops over there.
Oh,
building it
yeah.
up more and more and more and more. Nobody really wants to.
Kennedy was
know.
Navy. I
Right.
mean, he had a Navy idea.
Right. And it just seemed like, I was a little young for the Vietnam conflict, but it just seemed like there was never a strategy to win. There was never a way we're just like, here's how we're going to win this. They would just kind of,
Yeah, they're
on the treadmill. I mean, they were just kept walking in place.
art
Thinking something was gonna
imitates
happen.
life, right? There were two programs. One was MASH, okay, which was kind of a mashup between
Yeah.
Vietnam and Korea.
Korea.
Okay, and
Didn't that show outlast the war?
Yes.
MASH was on air longer
Yeah.
than the war was going
yeah,
on.
it was on longer than the war, right?
Yeah.
It was on longer than both wars, actually. But it showed in Pork Chop Hill. If you ever saw that movie, The Battle of Pork Chop Hill, it's where Congress told them they needed to take this hill, and then they needed to retreat, and then they needed to take the hill back again, and that's what the politics was involved in those wars, and that was what made it a problem. I have a different issue with our involvement in Ukraine. My issue with our involvement with Ukraine is that I thought we made a deal, and I thought we made actually two deals. The first one Reagan made, and the second, that was SALT II treaty. And that's the one you told us last week that wasn't ratified by the U.S. Congress. And you're right, it wasn't ratified by the U.S. Congress. But this guy signed a memorandum with the UK and Russia.
The Budapest memorandum. That's the one I was thinking of.
Well, it was called, I guess Clinton came out with it later. It was called the Budapest
That's what
memorandum.
Yeah, Budapest memorandum. That's what I had in mind.
So, are you familiar with it? I mean, I'm not familiar with the Budapest memorandum. Can you explain a little bit what that is?
So, again, vaguely, I'm not any sort of foreign policy expert. My understanding is that was the memorandum that led to Ukraine actually letting go of its nuclear arsenal, de-arming nuclear weapons. And it basically, it didn't provide security guarantees per se. It was actually very, very careful with what exactly was being committed to, which is more less nothing.
Yeah,
but it suggested that if there was a territorial conflict either way, that we would help support them.
So we're gonna kind of treat you like a NATO nation, but you're really not
I
a
wouldn't even
NATO
put it that
nation.
high.
You're really
It's-
not a NATO nation.
Well, we won't let we have an interest in Russia not being on NATO's border, so we need to keep you there as not part of NATO. Because obviously, if NATO extends into Ukraine, Russia's on their border. But we have an interest if Russia did try to invade that we would want to stop them from pushing up to Poland.
Well, the United States, the United Kingdom, and one other, I think it was France, signed an agreement. Oh, Russia signed an agreement with whoever was representing the Ukraine at that time, that if they gave up their nuclear arsenal, which was the third largest in the world, more than China at the time. It was the third largest in the world. If they gave it up, they would, and the phrase I'm looking at in that Budapest, they would guarantee the internal integrity of the nation's sovereignty. Okay?
Right.
That was how it was phrased in this Budapest memorandum. Now, I don't know whether or not the Congress has to oversee everything the president negotiates, but as far as I'm concerned, I always thought that one of the president's powers was in foreign relations. That was his purview. You know, it wasn't a senator's purview. It wasn't a judiciary purview.
But like he said last week, yeah, the president, that is one of his main jobs, but he can't enter into treaties arbitrarily. He has to have the support of Congress to do it.
Well, what about memorandums?
Well, memorandums aren't treaties, and that's why they're memorandums and not treaties. Okay,
So they should
don't
given
bind
up.
you.
So they were dumb Slavs that gave up their stuff.
And I think the United States...
130 ICBMs with 6 nuclear warheads on each one. 37.
And I would even grant you,
10
Danny,
nuclear warheads.
Danny, I would even grant you in that situation, I think the U.S. may have acted immorally by trying to hold ourselves out as offering more than we were actually willing or able to give. We probably shouldn't do that. It's going to hurt our credibility internationally.
We sure did.
But I also don't think that makes it a legally binding treaty.
So why was it so important for Ukraine to give up their ICBMs? What were they going to do with them? What was everybody afraid they were going to do with them at the time?
Well,
attack Russia?
It was during the SALT II
Okay.
treaties that they were trying, both sides were trying to reduce nuclear proliferation. They were trying to get China involved. They were trying to get North Korea involved. They were trying to show everybody, every nation that was advancing towards nuclear armament, that there was going to be an oversight committee. Okay, it never came out because SALT II never got ratified. Nothing happened to this day. In fact, the gentleman's agreement of this Budapest memorandum is supposed to expire in December 2025. You know, that's the expiration date on it.
So you're saying Putin got impatient.
It sounds like it's already expired.
Yeah, it has in effect. But I mean, even the thought of it's going to go away. But
I'd say what expired? It's like if I had an empty carton of milk in my fridge with an expiration date stamped on it. There was nothing ever really there. There's nothing behind it. So
it's kind of like when I had my quadruple bypass. The doctor gave me a shelf life of 15 years. So that's my expiration date was last year.
That's
Anyway.
medical. The medical technology is going to keep you longer, Danny. Sorry to tell everybody, but he's going to be around a lot longer than he thinks.
You think so?
You know, I mean,
Try to
the
get
history,
insurance.
the history of Ukraine is kind of interesting. I mean, it was originally given its somewhat autonomy by Khrushchev. Okay, he was Ukrainian, and he was like, let Ukraine be Ukraine, and Kiev at one point was the capital of Russia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
in history.
That's one of the reasons. I've been told not to call it the Ukraine. It's Ukraine, because apparently Ukraine means borderland, and so is the borderland of Russia is originally what is being referred to. And well, now that they've taken it as the name of their independent nation, they feel like saying the Ukraine is referring to it as a region, like the borderland of Russia, as opposed to in itself its own entity.
As long as we don't have to use pronouns.
Yeah, well, let's look.
The is an article. We're fine. We're
it's
fine.
an article. It's like
One of the things that Putin cited as the reasons why he needed to invade Ukraine was that there was a lot of Russians that lived there. They lived in Donbass and they lived in the Crimea, and he knew that they were Russians because they spoke Russian. Did you know that 1.7% of Western Alaska speaks Russian and is direct descendants of Russians? So what would happen? What would your feelings be as a conservative Republican if Putin put 150,000 Marines on the western side of the Bering Strait and said, you know, there's a lot of Russian-speaking people over there on the eastern side of the Bering Strait. How would you feel at that point, guys?
I would laugh heartily because Russia is in no position to challenge the United States.
right.
But I don't think that the emotional argument's relevant. Again, speaking of Putin's, his statements on this, let's say, I kind of voiced this opinion a few weeks ago, but I think that, there was a defecting Soviet general, and I forget the term of it, but he basically talked about the kind of psychological, warfare and strategic ambiguity, let's call it, that the Soviets employed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically to just spread messaging and mayhem and confusion as much as you can, just to hide your real motivations. I think to a certain extent, everything that Putin has said is partially true.
You mean
I think
disinformation?
Well, I
Kinda?
always figure out what's the difference between disinformation and misinformation. I don't want to get censored on YouTube. But yeah, no, kind of, yeah. And so I think when he talks about the Russian-speaking people and reuniting the Soviet Union, I think that's kind of his message for at home to raise national support. And I think that is something that he partially believes in. When he talks about, we'd mentioned previously that they just asked prior to the invasion a few months before, he wanted a written guarantee that Ukraine wouldn't be admitted into NATO. And now, he's using that on the international stage as saying, well, this is why we invaded. I think these all kind of answer different questions of what did he go after? When did he decide to go after it? But they're all real motivations. But I think the real political reason is that he wanted to secure land access to Sevastopol so that they could access
Right.
the Black Sea.
Right.
And I think that with the Donbass, he has that.
Wasn't it the same issue with the Baltic states going to the Baltic Sea?
Yes, but the Black Sea is more important because it's a warm water port.
Well,
And it gives them access to the Mediterranean, to the Suez Canal, to the Strait of Gibraltar. So the Baltic Sea is important, but the Black Sea is so much more important for international shipping.
there's grain trade there, and there's oil tankers that go through there.
Yeah.
You mentioned, the Ukraine joining NATO. Okay, Ukraine never wanted to join NATO. They never asked to join NATO. Okay, NATO never asked the Ukraine to join NATO. The only one that was talking about the Ukraine being in NATO was the Biden administration. So, and why they decided to take that position, I think people are still shaking their heads at.
I think the Zelensky administration, which Zelensky took office during Trump's first term, they were more Western friendly, and so it kind of raised the concern. Zelensky flirted with the idea, but I think that was more of just kind of negotiating leverage because he also wanted EU membership, but he didn't want to be excluded from trade with Russia. They kind of because basically Russia and Ukraine had a free trade agreement, and Russia was concerned that if Ukraine got access to duty-free goods as a member of the EU, they could pour more easily into Russia and ruin their economy. So there's a bit of background there where it obviously they weren't applying. I don't think they had a membership action plan or whatever they call it.
Right.
But there was definitely some negotiating and leveraging around the idea. But I tend to agree with you. It's really more of a bargaining chit at the most.
Well, it's come down to the nuts and bolts of war. Okay, the response on Russia's side was to send missiles. They sent troops, but they also sent missiles. Where did the missiles go? Did they hit churches? Did they hit schools? Did they hit hospitals? Were there kids running around with half an arm? Some 9-year-old boy that got blinded with shrapnel? Was that all worth whatever Putin thought it was, the damage to his country?
It seems to Putin it is.
I'm talking to two conservatives over here.
No, I don't see what that has to do with anything. I mean, Putin is an interesting individual, to say the least, and
So is Satan.
Again, I'm not saying the guy's a saint. I'm not saying the guy is right in what he did, but that's what he did. Now the question comes in is he a threat to us? Where are the rest of the Europeans? Where are they in this whole battle? I don't see anybody if from Europe coming in and taking the lead on this and saying, hang on a second. They continue to buy from, they continue to trade with Russia, they continue to do all this business with Russia, even though they know that he, according to you, is committing all these atrocities in the Ukraine. In Ukraine or the Ukraine? Which one can I say? No, I'm confused now.
I think you have to say the Ukraine if you're supporting Putin.
Okay. No, then I'm not supporting anything. The country that we're talking about.
You're giving us the story of Vinny and Guido. All right, that's what you're telling us. Vinny and Guido on the schoolyard playground. Guido's the big tough guy. Vinny's the third tough guy. Okay. So Vinny gets into it.
Wait, who's the second tough guy?
Or the second tough guy, or whatever. Guido gets into it. He's the big tough guy, right? He gets into it with somebody who might be almost as tough as him. All right. Now he's looking around for Vinny to see if Vinny's going to join him on his side to intimidate the guy who's giving him the bully stuff.
Where are you going?
What I'm saying is that you're saying that where is Europe? To call Europe Vinny and call the United States Guido, okay? And call Russia, whoever you want to call them, okay?
But the
Danny,
Trump,
I haven't followed the
Trump,
story for a
right,
second.
Yeah, you lost me. The Trump administration has always said is we're going to do what's good for America first. We're not going to go do what's good for anybody else unless there's a American interest attached to it. Okay?
And there isn't?
I don't know how much of there's an interest in for the United States, for you and me.
What
and
do your
anybody sitting
guys
in the room.
tell you?
What do my guys?
What are they justifying the non-interest? What is our non-interest from your side?
Our non-interest is, first of all, obviously we didn't send troops, thank goodness. We've been wasting a lot of money there for what? Okay, because Putin's the bad guy. If Putin's the bad guy, then everybody's got to get on board to stop the bad guy, like they stopped Hitler or Stalin or whoever else you want to put into the demonic category.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you
All
got to
right.
stop them. Period. If you're a humanist, you have to stop this guy.
We didn't get involved in World War II until somebody crept on us.
I know, and that was
Okay,
a
well-
mistake, wasn't it? Ask any Jew.
Oh.
I don't know. The way it turned out, I don't like playing counterfactual history. For all we know, the U.S. getting involved sooner makes Germany refocus westward, not invade Russia in the first place. Fighting on only one front, maybe they succeed. I don't know. I don't think that would be true.
And maybe
But-
England would be speaking German by now.
I think it ended well enough that I don't want to tamper with history. Maybe don't go back and kill Hitler because maybe Goering would have been more effective in the head seat. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, I just don't think that our money is being spent wisely when it doesn't defend against kids getting blown apart, and when it does add to other kids getting blown apart in places like Gaza. Our money goes to Israel. Israel buys armaments from an armament company in Alabama that makes 5,000-pound bombs. The Israelis drop those 5,000-pound bombs on Gaza indiscriminately. It kills and maims a bunch of kids and non-combatants. Where are we going with that?
I don't
That's
wanna-
our
listen,
money
I don't
going
wanna-
to Israel. Now, you don't want our money going to the Ukraine to fight
Yes.
Russia. So where is our money best
Okay.
going?
Here,
yes.
I think that we send it to neither place. Okay, so Israel's a bit more complicated. We can get into that in a minute. I'll agree with you, Danny. What Putin did was immoral. Invading the Ukraine, immoral. I think Ukraine has every moral justification to fight back, to stop the Russian invasion, maybe even to seek a little bit of retribution against Russia. Again, I hope they don't bomb any civilian centers.
I would give them back their 130 ICBMs that we made them give away.
Okay,
and then let them do what they want to do at that
but
point.
here's the thing. I don't think we get involved. We say, oh, well, go
Well,
ahead,
we're
guys.
not
We're rooting
involved. We're
for
just
you.
giving them back what we took away. We
Giving
took
them
away
back
their
nuclear
100
weapons.
Well, we'll give them half back, okay? Russia took the other half. So we'll give them, 60. And then there's the 10 warheads, the 47
Yeah,
ones
I'm
with
not
10
interested
warheads.
in
We'll
having
give them 20
two
of those.
nuclear-
Okay, and let them go fight it out with Putin because it's
maybe-
none of our business.
Maybe
they're
it puts
across the
Putin on
pond.
his heels makes him stop, but I'm not interested in two nuclear powers facing off at each other, especially if they're already in the middle of a hot conflict and then empowering one with nuclear weapons. Maybe if we'd done it prior, I don't know, I could see the case for it.
Well,
But
listen,
no,
we got involved in
just
this
not
a
interested in our
long
money.
time ago, okay, when we made them give up their crap. We got involved with the Middle East a long time ago when we decided we were going to take all of the Jews that were harmed by Germans and we were going to put them on top of people that already lived in a place for 1,000 years without Jews, okay? But we were going to make it so that the Jews got that land back.
So the only Jews that were in Israel were the ones that came there after 1946?
No, there was some that came before that. They bought property there.
Yeah.
But the
They've been
majority
there a long
of them
time.
came after
They've
that.
been there a long time.
Huh?
They've been there a long time.
Yeah, not as many of them as
Well, okay.
the Palestinians.
Okay.
Who owned the property.
Well-
Okay? They were told,
Well,
take
we're
the
gonna-
money
we're-
and
we're-
go.
We're saving this for another discussion because we've talked about another
Yeah, we're-
we're
Next,
that we're going to devote.
when I
to
come
Yeah.
back from Italy, I'll be full of P&V. Okay? and we're going to talk about Gaza. All right?
That's fine. Danny and our Palestinian friend can just try to murder me over my opinions. that will be some fireworks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a tough subject, but I you're talking about dropping bombs. You said Israel indiscriminately drop bombs here and there, and I don't.
Well, they're dropping dumb bombs.
Well,
they're not smart
again,
bombs.
I don't think the Ukrainians are hiding in schools and hospitals like Hamas is known and has been proven to do.
Well, I'm not real happy
So
with
that's-
Hamas either.
Well,
Because
I don't-
as a Sicilian, I would have handled it differently.
Okay.
Okay,
Well,
if-
you would have
if
gotten
Hamas-
Vinny and the other goon on the
No, they-
playground.
Get them to sneak
and
a
then it
horse
was
head
like,
into
yeah,
Netanyahu's
Are you
bed.
on my side? You on my side? You on that guy's side? Which
No,
which one? You
I
want,
would have
baby?
gone. I would have sent a bunch of Sicilians at night across the border, and we would have gotten 10 people for every one that they got, and brought them back and held them captive until there was a negotiation. But we would hold 10-1. That's what we would do. We wouldn't bomb them. We'd just get them. We'd get them and we'd hold them.
Wait, hold on.
know?
You were saying if you were in charge of Israel, you would
Yeah,
get
if I was
relative
Israel
to the
and I
ones
did
who were
it
taken on October
yeah,
7th. Okay.
if I did it the Sicilian way, if I was in charge of it.
You're just saying if I was them. I was like, wait, which side is them in
Right,
this? It's like,
right.
okay.
Right. So.
Well, I mean, listen.
I-
After World War II, U.S. involvement in wars has been questionable in terms of their reasons and then their commitments to it.
You didn't like
Okay.
the Truman Doctrine? You thought that was no good?
I don't know if it wasn't any good. It just seemed like even in Korea, even though they had a coalition of NATO forces, what was the end game? What were they trying to do? Prevent
Stop South Korea from becoming communist.
Okay, so and they ended up doing that, but why was that just the only goal of the conflict?
It was the only one they knew. This was a
Okay.
new thing for them. You
Right,
know? I
right.
mean,
And
this-
so you can't. It's hard to criticize them in that situation because, the big red scare. Everybody was afraid of communism.
well, nobody knew how to distinguish communism from socialism, and there was socialism in the 30s in this country.
There also were
But not
communists
communism.
infiltrating the U.S. government. Like,
Well,
everyone gives Joe McCarthy a lot of shit these
thought
days.
so, but
There were.
Yeah.
What was his name? Alger Hiss?
Right.
yeah, and there was the one that sold the blueprints for the fusion bomb.
I'm blanking on the guy's name.
Kraus was his name, I believe.
I thought it was.
There was
Rosen-
another guy. He wrote he switched sides, but he basically wrote a whole book about being like, yeah, you know what? I came to the U.S. as a Soviet spy. I totally embedded myself in the government as high up as I could go. It was planned. It was coordinated. Here's some other people that I knew doing the same thing. It's like, oh, okay. So again,
But so I mean,
Sensationalism
you can
of that,
almost
but-
you can almost understand why Korea was Korea. But then when we got to Vietnam and they tried to use that same playbook, and like you said, tactically and from a military goal position, that's not what they were doing. And
Well,
then now we had a young movement of people that suddenly found a voice, and they suddenly found television, and they finally found protesting.
No, they found our draft card is what they
and
found.
and as Tom said on one of our episodes, is we weren't protesting the war; they were protesting the draft.
Yeah, I mean, guys who got
Which
out of the draft
I
got
found
their
to be
girlfriends.
I found to be a fascinating statement. I had never heard that before from people from that generation that were involved in that. Is we didn't care about the war; we cared about the draft. We just didn't want to get drafted.
There was something popular at the time. It was called a Dear John letter. Okay, it was the guys that went to college, so they got the college deferment,
Right.
or if the guys got some ailment like the president got
Right.
bone spurs, right?
Right.
So they got a 1Y, which was a deferment unless there was a total declared war. If there was a declared war, then
Right.
they would take the
They were-
1Ys, but they would put them in desk jobs
Right.
and support
Non-combat.
jobs, right? Non-convict. And these 1Ys, there were thousands of them, maybe hundreds of thousands of them across the nation.
Okay.
It was something you could pay your doctor to get.
Okay.
And when you got drafted, you went away, your girlfriend stayed, and she got lonely after 18 months of not hearing and seeing from you. And the 1Ys were right there, and they had the cars, and they had the money, and they had the wherewithal to actually make your girlfriend
But again,
do a Dear John letter.
What's your point in that? I'm missing.
They
your point.
hated the draft because they were
hated the
forced.
draft because they lost their girlfriends.
Yeah, because they were forced out of their lifestyle and put into a deathly situation. Wouldn't you?
Well, no. I get the guys that got drafted and got shipped. But the Dear Johns that stayed home and didn't go to war and then they got shipped off to some camp in, Kentucky and lost their girlfriends.
Well, what was
I
the
don't know.
point
I
of
don't
the
know.
war is what you
I don't.
asked,
I
right?
don't know. I don't know if that was a big motivator in the protest.
Well, they told us the point of the war.
Some of them might have been grateful, frankly. They're like, oh, really awesome.
I got rid of her. Now we're getting free love and drugs, right?
Well, that's-
In that era.
Oh yeah, it was that era. It was a beautiful time.
Have you guys seen the Ukrainian draft and how that's going, or maybe it's the Russian ones, how they're just scooping people off the street, throwing
Yeah.
them in vans?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
that was-
wild.
That
They're
was-
going
Didn't
older
the British
and older
do that
too.
to us around 1812? Was the impressing of American naval vessels?
Conscripts.
Anyway,
I just saw a video yesterday of a Ukrainian delivery. He was like a food delivery driver, had a big like Duluth pack on his back. Sorry, I'll talk into the mic here, but this delivery driver had a huge pack on his back, was riding down the street in Ukraine, and 3 soldiers got out of this van, stopped him, and literally just fought him for 10 minutes until they got him in the van and drove off. Left his bike, everything there, and just took off.
so you're saying he was drafted,
The Ukrainian.
Yeah, that.
or as they call it in Europe, impressed.
Well, I think internally both Russia and Ukraine are suffering from what's going on here. I'm hearing, the populace in Russia aren't real happy. I think the death count is 100,000 Ukrainians to about 300,000 Russians, which
Well-
is huge.
You know,
Yeah, you
Social
can trust those
diff-
numbers from either side.
No,
yeah,
well,
they vary a lot.
again, I heard him from somebody that's pretty knowledgeable about Ukraine, so
Sure.
take it with a grain of salt. But yeah,
you know,
They
many
got fog of war. Who
many
can even get accurate numbers?
sociologists and cultural anthropologists claim that Russian people, not all of Russia, I mean, not including, the eastern part of Asia, that's Russia, but more the European part, has historically been a xenophobic country. They were always afraid, and they kind of have a shield against other countries. The only, what was funny in
so
historic.
you're saying that they didn't care if people that weren't like pure-blooded Russians got killed in the Ukraine?
No, I'm saying the opposite. As a xenophobic country, they're going to glam on to anybody that they think is related to them, and everybody else is against them. Okay, so if you got people in Donbass and Crimea that are sympathetic to Russia, they want you, okay, because they know everybody else is Napoleon. Okay,
I was missing
that's
your
what
point.
xenophobia is.
No, I know what
I feel like
xenophobia,
that's
but
true for pretty much everyone historically, and for most countries even still today, that they're pretty xenophobic. There was
Italy,
a letter?
is it? They want you to come there and spend money.
No,
They
it
want you to
depends.
move there, though.
There are plenty of Italians who are not the most welcoming when I was there. The Irish might be the exception. When I was in Ireland,
Yeah.
everyone I met was like welcoming me into their home. Like,
Really?
when I was like, oh yeah, visiting from America, like, oh my God, like, how are you enjoying the country? Oh, have you seen this? Like, the most.
Yeah,
I've been to a few European countries. The Irish take the cake for hospitality. It was kind of wild.
Did they go over genealogy with you to find out if you were related in any distant way?
No, I didn't really try to like bring it up because my grandmother was born in Dublin. But, like, I'd never been there before. It's like I see myself as an American. People talk like, oh, like I'm half Italian, half German. I'm an American. But in Dublin, it came up a little bit. There's a church across St. Stephen's Green where my great grandmother would clean every Saturday, and there's a little like bronze plaque to her in the church, just like thanking her for all the work. So that was kind of cool to go see.
Cool.
But yeah, no, it's just and my girlfriend's like she's part Irish, but she's mostly Italian, and everyone is super welcoming to us. I don't think it was a xenophobia thing. I forgot how we got on this one.
No, well, I'll tell you, just a little add-on on that. My oldest daughter visited Ireland with her girlfriends, and her girlfriends were Irish. One was blonde, one was redheaded. And she said any pub that they went into, all the guys came up to her and said that she was exotic looking because she had black hair and brown eyes. Okay, it was exotic because
Having
different than what they're used to.
having
trying to
not been a big European traveler, I can't say to how warm countries are. I've heard people say they love to go to France, but the French people are just not a welcoming people.
Yeah.
The Greeks are. It depends on where you're at in Greece. If you're in the tourist spots, you're just an ATM machine. But you go to the villages and you go to some of the islands, and it's just beautiful, and they're welcoming, and they bring you in. Same thing with parts of Italy as well too. So I'm sure, they each have their own. The tourist spots are the tourist spots, and then you get out into the countryside, and obviously people change.
I say even in America, I remember in undergrad we read this letter from Ben Franklin, and they kind of blacked it out. They redacted parts of it. And he was talking about these people who were, savages. They're not civilized. They shouldn't be welcomed here in the Americas. We are like a Gentile people, and they really can't be abided. They'll ruin our whole culture, need to be kept out.
Who are they talking about?
The Germans.
And you mean all of Eastern Pennsylvania?
Yeah, the Schaumburg right down the road here. A lot of Germans that settle there.
So, listen, getting back to Ukraine, I heard there's been a flurry of fighting because there's supposed to be some type of ceasefire coming up in the next couple days or so.
Which is ridiculous. I feel like you'd scale it down.
Well,
they want to gain as most territory they can before they have to be stopped.
Of course.
Sure.
And will something come of it? I don't know. I think Ukraine has traditionally been a pretty corrupt country.
They're the same people as the Russians. They're all Vikings. They're all descendants from Finnish Vikings is what they are.
All right, so they're Finnish Vikings. It's still a corrupt country.
Asiatic Finnish Vikings.
There's a reason why so many politicians are really interested in Ukraine. Okay.
Well, there's rare earth. If I was Zelensky, I would make a deal with China. Screw everybody else, because China needs the lithium more than anybody else does.
Well, and that's the deal that Trump's trying to make with them, and that
he wants to extort that out of him. Zelensky
and
can
the
go
Chinese are just going to give it to. They're just going to
look at
give them a fair deal.
Look at the silk.
Come on, Danny.
Look at the
We've
silk
already given
road.
them so much crap. How dare we try to get
Come
paid
on.
back for it after the fact?
Come on. Right.
Look
the
at what
Chinese
China's doing in Africa.
You're going to tell me that the Chinese are honorable people to do business with?
No, but they are businessmen. Okay, they are.
They're thieves.
They
Talk to the president from Motorola. He moved all of his operations of Motorola out of China because they couldn't do business there because all they did was
China
steal.
needs you to give them 51% of the shares of stock to do business in China.
No,
that's
because they steal everything
steal your
and they
IP.
replicate it. And they don't care about copyright.
Because they own 51%, they can go
was,
into your
Danny,
R&D.
that's just wrong.
There was
it's
a
just
businessman.
wrong.
He was in China. He was approached by the CIA before he took his trip, and they supposedly gave him a laptop, a business laptop, cloned his hard drive onto it. But basically, whoever opened it, it would just run the webcam without activating the light. Sure enough, leaves in his hotel room, goes out, gets dinner, whatever, has his whole trip, whatever, gets back. They checked the footage, and sure enough, first night he was there, left his hotel room, 3-4 Chinese guys in suits came into his room, opened up the laptop, were going through it for an hour. They just come in, they steal the IP, they have no respect for intellectual property rights.
The Motorola says, he goes, we all they do is steal your stuff, they replicate it, and they reproduce it, and you have no recourse. What are you going to go sue them?
Well,
They'll laugh at you.
Do you remember those same things said about Japanese 10 years ago? How they copied Canon cameras and made Nikons out of them, and Japanese cars. Look at the Toyota. The early Toyotas look like carbon copies of Ford Mustangs.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Okay.
That's reverse engineering and differences in patent law. Japanese companies will avail themselves of U.S. jurisdiction in some cases, mostly because Japanese law is very, very vigorous, let's say, about imposing trademark and copyright materials.
They like to protect their own.
Because Nintendo.
Right.
Nintendo's actually driven Japanese law in this regard because their characters are not going in anyone else's video games. And they get very aggressive about that kind of thing. And so they will respect
now they have
our
something
laws,
to
but
protect.
But they will respect, they have broader exceptions for reverse engineering. So they figure out how you did it by just looking at your product. It's fine. They're not going to go in like the Chinese do and just say, oh, this is your patented intellectual property. Thanks for writing it all out in the patent for us. We're just going to build this.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so you want getting back to the minimal rights.
Yeah.
That's what Trump and I think his idea is that if we have this mineral right interest in the Ukraine, now it puts Putin a little bit more back on his heels because now we have an interest to protect in terms of the mineral rights that we were.
But that's everybody's interest in Ukraine. There's two things that Ukraine has.
Yeah, but now we have a
deal.
stake in it.
Yeah, now, but now he's cutting the deal with us. He's not cutting it with anybody else.
They also are one of the third or fourth greatest producers of wheat and grain.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
they have a huge production in that. They have a huge production in natural gas and oil. They have a huge production in lithium. They have a huge production in some other rare earth material.
Well, they
I
do
forgot
noble
what it was.
gases. They produce a lot of. It's not neon. I think it's neon or xenon, but they use that in microchip manufacturing. They use lasers to trace the routes on the microprocessors that they're making in Taiwan. Well, they fill the chamber with neon or xenon because they're super non-reactive, and so the laser goes exactly like it's produced every time. There's never, a little bit of nitrogen in the airstream that messes up the laser.
So it doesn't bleed.
Right.
Right. Well, I still think that he could have made a deal with Z. He could have made a deal with Z, and it could have broke the bond between Russia and China. And that's what I would have
G.
done.
I thought you were saying Z like
Well,
Zelensky.
G, Z, XI. I'll call him 11.
Wait. You think Zelensky could have cut the deal with you?
Yeah. He looked the wrong way. He looked at Trump. Trump wasn't going to do a deal with him when he didn't back him up with the Biden thing.
Trump's doing a deal with them now.
He's not going to make a deal with him now. He already humiliated him in the office.
He was just
think
talking
he
to him
already
at the
did.
Vatican a few days ago.
He already did.
Yeah. I don't think that deal's going to. Is that deal going to be ratified? Does it have to be ratified? There you go.
No, I don't think so.
It doesn't?
So
No,
it's-
because it's a
Is it
material
a
supply deal.
memorandum?
So now,
No, it's a contract, but
so
it's a
now-
material supply contract. It's not military support. The argument is because we have a right to their minerals, as an international trade agreement. Well, if Russia attacks, it's going to be easier to get congressional support for a war. Well, more likely congressional appropriations for spending for
We will never go to war
international
with
military action.
It'd have to be pretty drastic for us to go to war
Russia.
with Russia. Okay. And I think Putin knows that.
Yeah,
I think
we'll
he-
do
I think
what
he
we
knows
did
that.
this time. We'll pour a bunch of money in. We'll let Poland send their outdated F-16s in, and then give Poland some of our updated F-16s.
Yeah.
It's the kind of stuff we're doing now.
We'll let Poland fight him, like we're letting
Or at the very
Ukraine
least,
fight him now.
will it Putin be afraid that we're going to do that?
Well,
I don't think he is.
I'm okay
I
with
think,
soft
I
power
think he's
influence.
just crazy enough to not be afraid of anything.
Putin?
Yeah.
I disagree.
Well,
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
How
folks,
so? Hang on. I want to hear this.
go ahead.
I mean, he's afraid of reputation, of losing face. I think that he's kind of self-deluded in his own self-image, but I think he's rational enough, psychopathic, and he's a sort of psychopathic rationalism where he knows that he's just a man, and he doesn't want his image to be tarnished. He's desperately trying to preserve his legacy, and having the United States actually get involved with NATO and give them a giant smackdown, maybe he thinks that won't happen because they're at a nuclear war. But he doesn't want to risk it and end up looking weak right at the end of his career.
I think it might be more like the end of his life. He doesn't look healthy.
Oh yeah, no, he's not leaving off. I was trying to just put it politely for
He doesn't look healthy. He doesn't
Internet.
look like the guy who was riding bareback on a horse anymore. He looks more like a guy who's got a perpetual stomachache.
I think the guy
Isn't a
thinks
guy
he's
like that
invincible.
dangerous? I mean, he's got.
I think the guy thinks he's invincible. He's like when we used to talk about working shows, man. The hardest guys to get control over guys that were either too drunk or too messed up
I don't
on
know.
drugs because
Quaaludes.
they didn't know they were hurt.
No,
they didn't know that
you
they
need
were
to
they were
see-
losing the fight.
You need to see the Russian tables.
And what is the Russian tables?
This was a meme during COVID when Putin was meeting with people. He had
Oh,
a
yeah.
giant,
Yeah.
50-foot long table, and they were all sitting at the far end
It
of
was
it.
a mafia table, where
The meme was like, we're going to impose on Ukraine with our table. We're going to keep them back there.
he's at the end and like everybody else is 40 feet away from him. But all right. Well, folks,
Yeah.
it's been
taking a
slow.
week
We
off.
haven't gotten any comments from you. What do you think about this? Anything?
Nobody cares. Nobody cares about Ukraine.
Nobody cares.
Nobody
You're
cares
going to
about
be
Ukraine.
caring when we come back. We're going to be off next week, but we come back on the 20th. Be ready for it, and you're going to contribute to it. We're going to have a special guest. We're going to talk about the situation in Palestine.
27th, we might reschedule.
The
it for.
27th. I'm sorry, the 27th. right. The 27th, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Time, Rhythm Roast Cafe with us. So, Nick,
Danny, Will stays out of this one, right?
good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are.
Good night, everybody.
Been around the low and the mighty, heard the sound of heroes is frightening. In every town, 1,000 kings, somewhere downtown on Metro 6. In Union Station, a man's waiting for the last train. People say that the old world is dying.